Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
With President Trump depicted by the media and pollsters as the unquestioned underdog in the 2020 election, this presidential race is increasingly bearing a remarkable resemblance to the political landscape surrounding the historic election of 2016. The media has again all but pre-written the story of Trump's defeat, and Democrats are ready to storm the White House and start measuring the drapes. If this sounds like a replay of 4 years ago, perhaps that's because of another striking similarity between 2016 and 2020. Trump's opponent. Yes, Joe Biden's of a different gender, more cognitively compromised, less shrill, and more somnambulistic than Hillary Clinton. Perhaps he surpassed Hillary's record low bar on favorability. But on the things that matter most, their establishment roots, worldview, prevailing ideology, and yes, the stain of thinly veiled influence peddling and official corruption, old Joe and Hillary are virtual carbon copies of each other. When Hillary received a congressional subpoena to hand over the contents of her controversial email accounts in 2016, she proceeded to delete some 33,000 emails and then physically destroy multiple devices which might have contained the remnants. This time around, we get mounting and increasingly irrefutable evidence that Trump's 2020 opponent used his own son as a de facto bagman for the big guy, Joe Biden. That Joe Biden stood by innocently as his entire family cut business deals in Russia, China, Ukraine, and elsewhere as he raked in hefty sums off the top while he was serving as vice president. Sadly, the saga of these two candidates cut from the same cloth tells a larger tale. That such corruption, far from being the exception or an outlier, is widespread among career politicians who settle into the swamp and ultimately leave office far better off than when they arrived. Put another way, they come to the nation's capital ostensibly to do good, but instead do well. That was a driving force behind the historic victory of the first presidential candidate who could credibly claim and later prove that he was a true outsider, unbeholden to the deep-rooted money changers holding the levers of power in Washington. Donald Trump has delivered on much of what he so audaciously promised 4 years ago. And that means the stakes are even higher for Democrats still in a deep state of denial, appalled and incredulous that Trump not only won the election in 2016, but actually meant what he said during the campaign. It means the left will not again make the mistake of believing the American people could not possibly elect a man like Donald Trump. But it certainly does not mean there's any more than a dime's worth of difference between his enemy's twin messengers, Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. But let's ask this question. What happens when a president is so successful with a particular issue that it no longer even merits discussion by the American people as he seeks re-election? What can you do if you are perversely a victim of your own success? How can you attract the attention of voters for policies of central importance that have been all but subsumed by a pandemic, raging urban violence, and Supreme Court drama? Thus is the state of the Trump foreign policy, which in ordinary times would be a significant theme in his re-election campaign. However, thanks not just to the deadly virus and civil unrest, but to the gloriously unaccountable Presidential Debate Commission, which wiped foreign policy entirely off their agenda, Americans have been provided scant opportunity to ponder how this president has navigated a perilous world order. But voters will inevitably evaluate at some level how Donald Trump has ushered in profound change in the way we deal with allies and adversaries alike. He's the first president in 30 years to reduce rather than escalate our involvement in foreign conflicts. He's the first chief executive to actually stand up to China. He wiped out the ISIS caliphate. He held to his explicit promise and that of his three predecessors to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and move the U.S. embassy there. He achieved a level of peace in the Middle East previously thought unattainable, with not one or two, but three separate peace accords in recent weeks, the first in almost 30 years, involving Israel and their longtime enemies. Trump reintroduced the bedrock Reagan policy of peace through strength by rebuilding our flagging military to the point that no nation in its right mind would challenge our superiority. He tore up NAFTA and pushed the new USMCA across the finish line, removing some of the most gross inequities in the previous deal. He moved the goalposts on North Korea, discarding the multilateral talks which produced nothing for years, and replacing it with an audacious personal diplomacy which has brought things into an entirely new context and at least stalled the present nuclear threat posed by the world's definitive rogue regime. He discarded Obama's Iran nuclear deal and he withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord. But what history should recognize as Trump's most seminal work, and clearly the most overlooked and underrated accomplishment of his administration, bridges the gap between foreign and domestic policy, thanks in large part to his deregulation of a heavily regulated fossil fuel industry and the ongoing fracking revolution. The U.S. is, for the first time in over 60 years, energy independent. That carries with it two crucial assets: lower prices for everything from gas at the pump to fuel in your home, and an end to reliance on foreign energy and oil-driven wars. Even Trump-deranged leftists should applaud this new world free of foreign entanglements for the sake of oil, which they so loudly decried during the Bush 43 administration. But of course, they won't. That brings us to the same time-worn slogan we hear every 4 years. This is the most important election of our lifetime. And it's usually followed up by the words, "This time we really mean it." Each side believes the other is not just wrong, but tragically misguided to the point of evil. But is this election truly transformational, as so many have maintained? A Joe Biden presidency would certainly represent a radical departure from the last 4 years, but mostly it would resuscitate the oh-so-familiar political establishment placed rudely on life support by the electorate in 2016. The progressive forces backing the former vice president strictly as the face of the party until November 3rd, as opposed to its true leader, are rightly viewed as the would-be power behind a Biden throne. All of this, we're told, renders the 2020 election one of unparalleled consequence. We're led to believe that no matter the outcome, the American people will make a truly transformational decision between polar opposite futures. But hold on one second. After decades of conventional and increasingly reviled left-right party politics, was it not an unabashed anti-establishment pro-America populism which has already transformed American politics? Didn't the real transformation occur in 2016? A victory by either candidate in 2020 will hardly reshape the entire political landscape as it did in 2016. If Biden wins, we'd usher in a return of the same basic cast of characters from the 8 years of the Obama era. Familiar faces from Hillary Clinton to John Kerry to John Brennan would re-enter stage left, and a return to the days of establishment rule would be assured. And that would hardly qualify as transformational. Okay, be that as it may, you might say, Biden and the Democrats are different now, sold out to a party base openly calling for radical reforms. But remember the ultimate goal of all parties, all political parties, to win elections. Would Democrats really be able to pull off the to-do list of Bernie and AOC plus 3 and expect not to be crushed in 2022 and again in 2024? Power is the ultimate aphrodisiac for professional politicians, and they always, always have their eyes on the next race. Folks, the balkanization of red and blue America is already well in place and certain to continue no matter who wins this election. It'll only be a matter of degree. Worry, if you will, about whether your candidate and party prevails on Election Day or beyond. But whatever the outcome, the decision of the American people will be revealing. It will hopefully be decisive, and it will be of abiding significance. But one thing it's not likely to be is transformational.